From FreedomFest 2009 held in Las Vegas, a debate on the Federal Reserve. Participating in the debate are economist Warren Coates, Wall Street Journal columnist John Fund, Barron's economics editor Gene Epstein, and Meltdown author Thomas Woods. It's an hour.
I'm Joe Bradley. For those of you who just joined us, we have a number of exciting panels scheduled. You've already heard one. In a previous life, I recently retired from publishing Investors Hotline, and in that role I had the opportunity to interview many of the top free market analysts, financial experts, economists that you're hearing here at this conference. I want to congratulate Mark Skousen for pulling together this Freedom Fest. It certainly is the world's largest gathering of people that are really interested in liberty that's ever been created. I understand there are around 1,500 people here now, and when Ron Paul's group gets here later this afternoon, it's going to swell between 2,000 to 3,000. So. On Investors Hotline, it was always a quest for truths, the economic truths that run our capitalistic economy, as well as, from a practical standpoint, how it's going to impact all of us as investors. So one of the overriding themes here at this conference, as you've heard, virtually everybody is unanimous in agreeing that the primary catalyst to the meltdown in 2008, as well as the ongoing problems that we're experiencing, is due to the government, its various entities. So one of the primary government entities, of course, that has been blamed is the Federal Reserve System. Now, the purpose of this debate this afternoon is to determine, is the Fed so broken that it should be totally abolished, or can it be modified or fine-tuned, whatever, and still continue? So on my left here, to vote for defending the Fed in some way, we have John Fund, first of all. John is an American political journalist and columnist for the Wall Street Journal. He's the senior editor and columnist for the American Spectator, and he's author of Stealing Elections: How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy. And next to John is Warren Coates. Warren Coates is an advisor to a number of central banks. He retired from the International Monetary Fund in 2003. He led missions to over 20 different countries. He's a visiting economist for the Federal Reserve and the World Bank. He's currently director of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, and he's also been an advisor to the central banks of Iraq, as well as IMF consultant to the central banks of Afghanistan, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Ooh, Zimbabwe. Obviously, they weren't listening to you, Warren.
They are now.
And then for abolishing the Fed, our next panelist, Gene Epstein, is Barron's economic editor. He was also former chief economist for the New York Stock Exchange. He writes a regular column in Barron's, and he writes it from the perspective of the philosophical view of Austrian economics, the school of Ludwig von Mises. And finally, we have Tom Woods. Tom Woods is senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Harvard, as well as a PhD degree from Columbia University, and he's author of 9 different books. The primary book that is very appropriate to this discussion is Meltdown, a free market look at why the stock market collapsed, the economy tanked, and the government bailouts will make things worse. So I'll have each of our panelists start out with a 2 to 5 minute opening statement, and then we'll let the fireworks begin, and hopefully we'll come up with some practical suggestions on what we should do going forward, both governmentally in our economy, but also for us as investors. So, Tom, why don't you lead it off?
Anything we can do to get the water would be.
Can we get some liquidity up here in terms of water?
Yeah, good kind. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And this will probably go right up to 5, but I promise I won't go beyond that. Okay. A lot of people seem to believe that although the market economy is a swell system, it requires the equivalent of a Soviet commissar to be in charge of money and interest rates. This belief is altogether misplaced. The Federal Reserve System, or simply the Fed, is both harmful and unnecessary. Since the Fed's creation in 1913, the dollar has lost at least 95% of its value. If the much-maligned gold standard had produced such a result, we'd never hear the end of it. But in our system, the Fed is, for whatever reason, curiously exempt from criticism. Under the Fed, therefore, people have lost an option they once had, namely accumulating savings in cash. Under a commodity standard, people could save for the future simply by accumulating precious metal coins, which back when they functioned as money, held or even increased their value. No one has that option any longer. In other words, only a fool would try to save by piling up dollar bills. Instead, everyone is forced to become a speculator and to invest in securities markets they know little about and that can wipe them out entirely if times turn bad. As early as the 18th century, Richard Cantillon identified distribution effects as another way inflation harms the general public. The newly created money is injected at particular points. Whoever receives it first, in other words, people who happen to be politically well-connected, get to spend it before prices have commensurately risen, and they thereby enjoy a windfall. By the time it trickles down to the general public, those people have been paying the higher prices to which the new money gives rise all that time. Private and public debt have exploded under this system, especially since the collapse of Bretton Woods in 1971. No one has a right to be surprised when indebtedness skyrockets under a system in which credit can be created out of thin air. The very existence of the Fed, a central bank, institutionalizes the problem of moral hazard. Moral hazard involves an actor's willingness to behave with an artificially elevated level of risk because he believes any losses he may incur will be borne by someone else. Since there is no physical limitation on paper money creation, market actors know the paper money producer can bail them out if things go terribly wrong. They have been vindicated in this belief time and again. They will therefore be more reckless in their investment activity and speculation than would otherwise be the case. We were once told that boom-bust business cycles were a thing of the past because thanks to the Fed, we now had scientific management of the money supply. If anyone believes that today, I'd like to meet him. Artificially low interest rates, courtesy of the Fed, do not in fact yield us a utopia of sunshine and kittens. To the contrary, they artificially stimulate capital goods production and long-term investment. They thereby deform the structure of production into a configuration that the public's freely expressed pattern of saving and consumption will not be able to sustain. When this phony boom inevitably collapses, it is capitalism that is stupidly blamed, when in fact the Fed, a non-market institution, is the culprit. I am interested in neither the saccharine promises nor the technical details